Hello, Refresh Church, and welcome to the third instalment of our series on the book of Romans called The Good News People. Today we're going to look at Romans chapter 3 and discover that the good news is unlocked by faith. And we're up to chapter 3, and we've already heard about Paul, the wonderful apostle by the grace of God, who is longing to preach the good news to the people of Rome, to the churches in Rome. And he starts off by telling us that our story's all wrong. It's not the Romans who are the bee's knees. They're not God's plan for the world. The Roman story has fallen short. It's led to a really sexually immoral kind of society, one where children are disobedient to their parents, and all kinds of wickedness is going on. But likewise, he then comes in with a bit of a shocker and says that you Jews, you're no better. You have the law, yes, but you just don't obey it. You do the same things. And so he says, we're all in trouble. We're all in need of good news, whether Jews or Gentiles. And that was a bit of a shocker. So he gets to the beginning of chapter 3, and he imagines his readers, especially if they're Jewish, saying, well, come on, is there any advantage then to being a Jew? Any profit to circumcision? And he says, yeah, well, yes, there is much in every way, but it's not the be-all and end-all. You're still in need of good news. So they have loads of advantages. They had the encounters with God, the stories of God's favour on them as a people, which are amazing. They had the scriptures. They had the law. They were as a guide on how to live, and so they were becoming better. But they'd failed to be the light of the world that God had called them to be. But they were entrusted with the very words of God, which is amazing. And God was enacting his salvation plan for creation through the Jews, which is also amazing. And I guess, really, if they were true Jews, then they would recognize Jesus, the Messiah. It should be easier for them to follow the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and therefore continue to join in with God's purposes. But the fact is, Paul says, we're no better than they. He says, what then? Are we better than they? Not at all. For we have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin. That's verse 9, chapter 3. We're all under sin. And although the Jews had the law, they had God's kind of manual for life, if you like. They had these rules which were supposed to help them lead a life which would make them the light of the world. The big problem for the Jews, and for all of us seeking to do the right thing, is just knowing the right thing, being told the right thing, is just not enough. In fact, often all the law does is end up making us aware of where we fall short. And that's what he says down in verse 20. He says, therefore by the deeds of the law no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. In other words, by the law is how we know where we fall short. And that's true. As a foster parent, I know that's true. If I can tell the foster kids till I'm blue in the face that, please, this is right, do this, and they all agree that it's right, but they still won't do it. So, this is a frustration for, I guess, most parents at one level. Yeah. And this is something for us just to be aware of. And what some religious people do is that they're great at spotting the problems in others. They're great at spotting the places where others fall short. And they can get great self-satisfaction out of pointing out the problems in other people's lives, the places where they fall short. But that's easy. And I tell you, the true followers of Jesus are better at spotting the logs in their own eyes than they are trying to get the splinters out of other people's eyes. And that's what Jesus said. But we'll come back to this. And before we go any further in Romans chapter 3, I wanted us just to take a look at a couple of words. Now, as we've been doing this series, I hope you've appreciated the fact we're not doing a forensic verse-by-verse, word-by-word study of the book, because often we lose the meaning as we look at too much detail. What I want us to gain is the ebb and flow of Paul's argument, to follow his thinking through the letter as he leads us through his understanding of what the good news is. So two words I want to look at this point to break with that and to dive into a bit of detail, because I think this next few verses is really dense and we need to understand some tricky words that Paul's introducing. The two words are righteousness and justified. And they have the same root Greek word, dikaios. And justified is dikaiahu, to be declared righteous or right, to be declared as you ought to be. That's justified. And righteousness, dikaiosune, is the state of one who is as he ought to be. You're right. Right with God. Now, Paul at the end of here is just saying that no one is righteous. No one is acceptable to God just as they are. No one can stand blameless before God. No one is righteous or justified, declared right to be with God by the law. That's what he's just said in 3:20. So we need a bit of more good news. And this is where it comes in chapter 3, verse 21. And in the New King James, it says, "But now the righteousness of God, apart from the law, is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets." The righteousness of God. Not as some translations would have had in previous years, the righteousness from God. No, this is God's righteousness. This is God being shown to be right, who he ought to be. And it's been pointed at by the law and the prophets, by the Old Testament. So let's move on to verse 22. It says, "Even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ to all." And in New King James says, "on all who believe, for there is no difference." Now that's a tricky verse in the Greek. It can have different meanings. There's a little phrase in there in the Greek called pistis Jesu Christou, and that can mean faith in Jesus or the faithfulness of Jesus. So the verse is the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ or through the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. And so we don't know exactly which one Paul meant. It could have meant both. To all who believe. And personally, I like the righteousness of God through the faithfulness of Christ, because you've got the believing part, the faith in Jesus part, in the next part of the verse, which is to all who believe. And it's a bit redundant if the first part means that. So let me read it again. Even this righteousness has been revealed, this righteousness of God, even the righteousness of God through the faithfulness of Jesus Christ to all who believe, for there is no difference. Now, this righteousness, remember, is the state of being as we ought to be, being right with God. And it comes by the faithfulness of Jesus Christ to all who believe. See, the faithfulness of Jesus shows us what this faith looks like. He modelled it, he preached it, he lived it, he went to the cross to demonstrate it fully. And when we gain his righteousness, We're considered to be just as he is just, to be right with God, just as we ought to be, completely accepted by God through believing in him, trusting him, having faith in him. How does that work? Is it a strange transaction that happens when his blood was shed? I don't think so. I think it comes from knowing that we're saved then. If we trust him, we'll follow him. Just like in the Good Shepherd that Jesus talks about in John chapter 10. He says, my sheep know my voice and they follow me. They listen to me. I go out ahead of them and they follow me. And I lead them into abundant life. So if we choose to have faith in Jesus, if we look at his life, the things he said about God, the way he lived, and his death and resurrection, and say, yeah, I trust Jesus, I have faith in Jesus, then we listen to his voice and we follow him. We won't get lost and we won't wander into trouble. He will lead us into good places. He'll lead us on a journey of transformation into Christ-likeness. That's what it says later in Romans chapter 8, verse 29. We're predestined to be conformed to the image of Jesus. And that happens through faith as we choose to trust him and listen to him and watch him and become more and more like him by the Spirit. But I just want us to take a moment now and to allow our souls to be flooded with the peace of God that comes from knowing he accepts you. Not because you're perfect, but because you've chosen to trust him through Jesus. You've chosen to trust the kind of God, the loving Father that Jesus revealed. And you might want to play some worship music just to soak for 5 minutes or so. I could recommend you listen to a song by a friend of mine, Rob Hayward, I'm accepted, I'm forgiven, I'm fathered by the true and loving God. You can find it on YouTube, but you can play any bit of worship music. But all I want us to do is just take a few minutes, pause the video, and rest in the faithfulness of God that Jesus has revealed. And know that his righteousness comes to us as we choose to say, I love you, Jesus, I trust you. That we are right with God, completely at peace and safe, saved. Take a moment to do that right now. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that meditation. It's good to live in the grace of God. It's good to live in that space, to know that we are accepted. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that brief meditation. It's a good place to live, to dwell, knowing that you're right with God. You can rest with him, be at peace with him through Jesus. Let's read on because it gets a bit dense, but it's good. So therefore, it says, the righteousness of God that comes through the faithfulness of Jesus Christ to all who believe. For there is no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, I want to just pause at that one verse, because that verse is often picked out as a key verse as part of the gospel. And it's true, it is an important verse, and it has kind of summed up all of Paul's arguments up to this point in the book of Romans. But it can sound very different depending on how we read it. And I want to just look at that. It was clearly true of the Roman culture. how degraded that had become. It was clearly true of the Jewish history and the way that they continually disobeyed God. If we're honest, it's also true of us, even after we become Christians or followers of Jesus. The difference is that we're captivated by the image of Jesus, and as we look at him, we're transformed into his likeness from glory to glory. That's 2 Corinthians chapters 3-4. Just this week, someone pointed out to me that I fall short. One way that I fall short is that I don't ask enough questions about people, and that is one way of showing interest in the lives of others, and I admit I'm rubbish at it. I really admire people that are able to think quickly and ask questions, insightful questions of others, to draw out the depths of their hearts. I'm just not so good at that, and I beg your forgiveness if that has hurt or grieved you in any way, and maybe you can help me get better at that. So it is true that we all fall short, but too often this verse is used to beat people up and to try to convince them that they're bad. That is not what it says. I mean, obviously, if you say it with an angry voice, or have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, then you can read it that way. But it says we fall short of the glory of God. And the very word sin means to fall short. We fall short of the glory that God intended for us. We fall short of Jesus. You know, when we look at his life, it's patently true, isn't it? We don't live the kind of life that he lived. And that should be the emphasis of this verse. It's an exaltation. It's calling us to a higher place. There's so much more glory that we could be living in if only we choose to follow him. So the emphasis is on what we're called to, not our fallenness. So but the sentence doesn't stop there, it goes on. So let's read on. It says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, comma, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood, through faith, to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at this time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Where is boasting then? It's excluded. By what law? Of works? No, but by the law of faith. Therefore, we conclude that a man is justified by faith apart from the deeds of the law. Again, this is a dense little passage, but it's incredibly powerful. The righteousness of God, he says, is being demonstrated in verse 26. That he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. That God might be shown to be right, to be righteous. And declares the one who has faith in Jesus to be righteous too. That's the good news. That is the good news. The faithfulness of Jesus, his life, death and resurrection, the way that he modelled what it could be like to be human is so glorious. It captures the hearts and minds of the children of God and leads them to the same place. This is the righteousness of God being revealed in Jesus. And Paul introduces a new concept here, the notion of grace, or of favour, the Greek word charis, getting what we don't deserve, better than we deserve. So we've all fallen short, yeah, absolutely, of the glory that we should be living or could be living in, but being justified freely by his grace. We're declared righteous freely by his grace that is in Christ Jesus, that comes through the redemption in Christ Jesus. Amazing. An undeserved gift. This is a world-changing idea. I love that U2 song called Grace. And Bono sings, grace, it's a thought that changed the world. And I agree with him, it is a thought that's changed the world. Every other religion and ideology or ism really is based upon karma, about getting what we deserve. But Christianity is all about grace, the free gift of God in Jesus. We must not allow the enemy to rob us or others of God's favour, of God's grace, through pointing out where we fall short. His grace towards us is great and comes simply by faith. That's amazing, isn't it? So there's no boasting. Faith isn't a work, it's simply choosing to trust him. And that is the key to life. It's the key to abundant life that Jesus promises us when he describes himself as the Good Shepherd. I've come, he says, that you may have life and have it abundantly. Follow me. Listen to my voice. Have faith in me. Faith is the key to abundant life. Faith is the key to a joyous life, a joy-filled life, joy inexpressible as we live in the goodness of God and grow to become more like him. Grace by faith is the key to this transformational life, to us all becoming more and more like Jesus. It's amazing. Okay, so let's finish there. But as we do, let's take another moment to reflect. Because let's be honest, we do all fall short. Is there anywhere that we're falling short, that we need grace to overcome today? If there is, let's not be shy, let's not back away, but let's just be honest. Have a sober look in the mirror for a moment and say, okay, I would like help in this area, please. Will you pray for me? You may do that in twos, or you may do it in a group, but take this opportunity just to do that, to receive a bit of grace. We start to really, truly live in and from the good news when we believe it. Faith, belief in, trust in Jesus is the key that unlocks all the power of the gospel for salvation. If we trust Jesus, God can lead us into the abundant life he promised. Faith is the key that unlocks the power of the good news in our lives. It's the key to the wine cellar, or if you've got a sweet tooth, it's the key to the cupboard where all the baked goods are kept, all the delicious cakes. It's the key to the safe which contains all the treasures of God. Faith, a simple trust in Jesus. Why not grab a key, a car key or a house key or any key, and just imagine seeing your faith as the key to abundant life. It's what he promises us. It's not a rose garden. It doesn't mean to say removes us out of all the problems of the world, because there are many. But it is a key to an overcoming, joyful, transformational journey through this life to becoming more and more like him. Take the key. Meditate on that. Pray for one another's faith, that we might grow in our belief and our trust, our faith in Jesus, the faithful Son of God. Until next time, guys, God bless. Lots of love. Bye.